there's some Hasidim that don't say the Haftorah out loud, any Haftorah. The explanation I had heard was because the Nach became the kind of specialty area of the enlightenment of the Maskilim. And so they downplayed anything that comes from Nach. So therefore they don't even say any Haftorah, they don't say it out loud. They say it to themselves. Like the person goes up, makes the bracha, and then he sort of reads it to himself.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know how many Hasidim that is and what the
Lubavitch,
where they're from, but Lubavitch still says it, but they may not.
They say it, but you have to strain.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't like the Torah either.
I wonder. Right. The Torah goes really fast too. I wonder if why the Maskilim, is that because they're not happy so much with that liturgy? The liturgy kind of makes me nervous.
Because it's no, for the Maskilim, because it's sort of the same thing happened with Christians. It's you can. It's just, if you are learning it superficially, you can make all sorts of arguments based on verses there that run counter to the Masorah. So the Maskilim were doing lots of that, in their debates and discussion with the what you would call orthodoxy. So there were commentaries like the Malbim, also what's his name, David Hoffman, and others, that in their commentaries on Navi, they are also responding to arguments made by the Maskilim. But I guess there were different approaches to what to do about that.
Interesting. By the way, both Ken's service and Susan Van Dusen said they blew the shofar on Shabbos there.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I think that's just I think that became common even in amongst the Reform movement in general, that they went doing that. Yeah.
Is there a punishment for blowing the shofar on Shabbos?
What?
Well, it would be not listening to the rabbis. With any statement about not listening to the decree of the rabbis would apply.
So you could get lashes for it.
Right. There might be. I mean, there are references to worse things, because there were times when they took not listening to the rabbis as a worse problem, because they didn't want it to catch, So there were times when they treated it even more seriously, like in the time of, or I think it was during the time of Shimon ben Shetach, when they killed somebody for riding a horse on Shabbos. They actually executed him. I don't remember if it was Shimon ben Shetach's time, but they executed somebody for riding on a horse on Shabbos.
Thereby violating the Gezerah.
A rabbinic, right? It was a Gezerah Rabbanon.
But in this one, it was, I don't know, it was performing. But you can do it if you had a properly constituted base dip.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not. You're just the general rule. If you're violating a rabbinic commandment in a dramatic way, it depended when you were living to how strong the reaction would be.
Aha.
That's all I'm saying.
Got it.
All right, where did we leave off? Oh, I talked to one of the things I talked to Mordechai Becher about was this one, which was the commandment to press the Gentile. So I asked him, what could the Rambam's meaning? In other words, what could he imagine would be the value in actually pressing a Gentile who, if you treat the parallel case is a Jew, you're not supposed to press a Jew. And we said, if it's talking about Shemitah, you're not allowed to, press them at all. But if it's talking about just a regular loan, we said that the case would have to be where he doesn't have the money to pay it. Because if he has the money to pay it, you're allowed to ask him to pay you back. You're just not allowed to press him if he says he doesn't have the money for it. So therefore, the parallel case with the Gentile would be that the Gentile told you he doesn't have the money, and now you're pressing him to pay you anyways, to find the money. So he suggested that it could be that because there is this notion of saving property or saving stuff, that objects have a kind of intrinsic spiritual potential. Even mundane objects can be used for purposes, and we would call that a kind of a transforming of the mundane into a spiritual, or a channeling of the mundane, the sparks of energy that are available in mundane things. So he was, and there is a notion, a general notion that there's a kind of redemption of an object. If you can take an object from a situation where it wouldn't have been used for a spiritual purpose, and you can now use it for a spiritual purpose, there's even like something like you're sort of saving it, or you're redeeming it. So he was saying that could be what's behind the Rambam, that this property in the hand of a Gentile is like something that is lost to its opportunity to be elevated. So therefore, you would, and again, he was even questioning, and I when we were looking at it, it wasn't clear to me if this applies even to a ger toshav. A ger toshav is a Gentile who is serving God. He's still serving God. He's just a Gentile. As opposed to an akum, like the language here is idolater. The translation here is Gentile from Francis Rabbi Nataf, but the actual Hebrew is akum, and akum means avodas kochavim mazalos. It means idolater. So it would be easier to say this if this was an idolater than to say it if it was a ger toshav. He was thinking that this most likely only applies to somebody who is not a resident alien, which means he's not keeping the Noahide laws. But if somebody was keeping the Noahide laws, he isn't as certain if this would apply. That's what he was saying. We were just having a conversation outside. But then, and the Rambam, and it could be that that's the thinking of the Rambam. The Ramban, again, we saw the Ramban says he is wrong, that this is not a mitzvah to press them. This is only giving you permission to, it's not a mitzvah to do it. But if the Rambam is saying it's a mitzvah to do it, it could be that it's for that reason, because you're sort of saving the potential of this money so that it can be used for a holy purpose. Okay, and then, so now we're on to...
Just before we go,
yeah.
The guy still can't pay you back, so why are you pressing him?
Because it's like, I referred you to The Godfather Part 2 and many other mafia-related and gang-related media, which have many times when people are supposed to be paying protection money or paying back a loan shark, and they tell them they don't have the money, and they'll push them, which makes it that suddenly they feel desperate and they have to find the money somewhere else, I guess. So I guess desperate, and a loan shark or somebody like that doesn't really care how the person gets the money, they just want the money.
So this is the status of a Jewish lender?
According to the Rambam. But you're all doing it for good, because whatever he finds to give you is going to be elevated to its potential.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I get it, it's puzzling. The whole thing is puzzling, but that was his shot at it. Okay, the next one is the first shearing. He shetzivanu latet reishis hagez lekohen. So sheep are sheared annually, I think, and that's a part of the reason why you would shepherd sheep. It's an income source. So the first shearing of a, I guess it would be a lamb, that wool is supposed to go to a Kohen. And this is another one of those gifts to a Kohen. We talked about in the previous one, the foreleg, the right foreleg, the cheek, and the abomasum. And so now we're also talking about another gift that would be given to a Kohen. Again, this would be given to an individual Kohen, not to a corporation of Kohanim. And so, so give us the first shearing to the priest, and that is his, maybe he blessed, saying, the first shearing of your sheep you shall give to him. The regulations of this commandment have already been explained in chapter 11 of Hulin. I am assuming, just based on what we saw about the gifts from cattle, from the meat of either cattle or sheep or goats, that there would be ways of getting out of this. And one of those ways of getting out of it would either for the owner himself to be a Kohen or a Levi, or for a Kohen or Levi to be a partner in it, or for a Gentile to be a partner in it. I don't know what they do nowadays, how they deal with this issue practically, but I'm assuming it's one of those ways. We did see in that discussion with that group, the Igud HaKohanim, the sort of organization for Kohanim, and in their articles, we saw that there were some people that would go out of their way to find a way to give those gifts. And they were trying to advocate that it happened more and more. But I'm assuming the same thing would be with the wool from the sheep. And then our next mitzvah, 145, that is that he commanded us to administer the laws of dedications. In Hebrew, this is called cherem. Now, the word cherem in its common usage means excommunication. So if you say that there is a cherem in a modern conversation in Hebrew, you are typically talking about an excommunication, but that's not its original meaning. The original meaning was something that was set aside. It could be set aside, and the original meaning was it was set aside as a gift for either Kohanim or a gift for the Beit HaMikdash. So it was a way of dedicating something to the Beit HaMikdash. You had a variety of options when it came to gifting something to the Beit HaMikdash. One of them is called a cherem. And so here they call it a dedication. And that is when anyone dedicates something of his and says, this is dedicated, that thing is given to a priest. Though if he specified that it would be for the temple upkeep, it would be for the temple upkeep, since understanding that undifferentiated dedications are for the priest. But again, if you differentiated it, then it would go to where you differentiated it. And that is maybe exalted saying, however, any dedications that a man will dedicate, etc. They hint to us about undifferentiated dedications being for the priests is it's being stated like a field that was dedicated, it shall belong to the priest. The regulations of this commandment have already been explained in the 8th chapter of Arachin and the 1st chapter of Nidarim. So these would be examples. Arachin is another way that you can donate something to the Beit HaMikdash. You can give so-and-so's value, and that would be a way of dedicating to the Beit HaMikdash. There's a tractate, Arachin, that talks about all these various ways of dedicating to the Beit HaMikdash, but also Nidarim, which talks about vows. There's some crossover there. Okay, now so that was a very esoteric, relatively esoteric law. We've had a couple of those, but now we get to something much more common. And that is, he commanded us to slaughter a beast, animal, or bird, and then to eat its meat. And that it only be permissible to eat their meat by slaughtering it. And that is, may he be saying, and you may slaughter any of the cattle of sheep. And the language of the Sifri is, and you may slaughter just as offerings are with slaughtering, so too mundane animals are with slaughtering, as he commanded you. This teaches that Moshe was commanded about the gullet and windpipe, about the cutting of the majority of one of those being the criteria for proper slaughter in a bird, and the majority of both in a beast. And the regulations of the commandment and its analysis have already been explained in Tractate Chulin. So those are just examples. But when we talk about shchita, what we mean is that you are going to use a sharp knife, and you are going to slice the throat of the animal in a place that will allow you to sever the trachea and the esophagus and the trachea. Those are required. Now, again, here he says at least the majority of them, but that's absolutely required when it comes to slaughtering. Obviously, it would probably be much deeper than that, but minimally, you have to get at least the majority of those, and that's part of it. That there's all sorts of oral law when it comes to shchita. There's rules about how the slice has to happen, that it has to be a continuous slice. They can't be pushing into the neck. You have to be slicing into the neck. The object that you use has to be without blemish, so that it's a smooth, even slice. I did one time see a Muslim shchita. There's a place on Western, right off of Devon and Western, where there's a man who shechts birds. It's just birds. He shechts chickens, but also other birds for Muslims. And so he showed me his shchita knife, and I asked him about how often they sharpen it. They also require it that it be sharpened, but not to the extent that where a shoichet tests it with his thumbnail in order to make sure there's no nicks. They don't do that, but they do. I think he told me they send it to knife sharpeners once a week or once every other week, but it has to be very sharp. Also, theirs is rounded. It looks like sort of like a sickle kind of thing, where ours is flat. I did once. I don't have it with me now. It's in TLC, but I have a chicken shchita knife. They're not that long. They're about this long, the chicken ones, and they're made of a very fine metal. they're very light. They tend to be very light, but they are a very sturdy metal. And there was a period of time where I was studying with a young man, and we were studying how to sharpen the blade. We each got blades. They're not cheap, those blades. I think they're like $150 just for that little chicken shkita one, the challah for the chicken. We were taught with a whetstone, where you wet the stone and you sharpen the knife with the whetstone. But if it's somebody who's never sharpened a knife before, which I had never sharpened a knife before, it's not something you learn in an hour or two. You have to like perfect it, and it could take some weeks to learn. If you've never sharpened a knife before, to get it to sharpen it to the point where it qualifies for chicken shkita. Again, on a bird, it's so anticlimactic. It just happens so quickly. It's just like the whole action on a bird is like this. That's it. It's done. And it seems sort of anticlimactic. I have seen the shechting of chickens on several occasions, and it's just very anticlimactic what happens. I don't know what the rules are for killing chickens. For cattle, they have to stun them, according to if they're not kosher shkita, they have to stun them, and before they kill them.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
are the knives? Wait, I'm looking at David's grandfather's. Let's see if I can get my.
Now that's one for a cow.
Are they?
No, chicken.
That's chicken.
They
Let me see it.
blunt at
Let's see how
the-
big it is.
Yeah,
Let
yeah.
me see.
There.
Let me see.
It's square.
Do
at
a
the
little
top.
higher. Yeah, do a little higher.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry.
I'm not seeing it.
Yeah. Why aren't I doing
I
it
don't
right
know.
here? There you are.
No, I don't see it still. I don't know why. You go by your face. Put it not by your neck, but by, there you are. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I don't know why they're square at the top. I don't know
All
why
right.
they're squared off like that. But mine was also squared off like that. Yeah. So so in order to you can study to be a shoichet for chickens. You could study the laws and the techniques and everything, and it would just be a couple months, and you could already be shechting chickens. And there are parts of the world where that's basically what they rely on for their meat. Like I was in Bombay, India, Mumbai nowadays, and the Chabad shliach at the Mumbai Chabad, who took over after the murder of the previous couple, he himself was a shoichet for chickens, and so he told us that I think he said twice a year he shechts chickens. He shechts like about 5,000 chickens, not just him alone. He has a couple shoichtim come in from Israel, and they shecht the chickens and then they freeze them. So like if you're in Mumbai and it's a Shabbos at the Chabad there, you're gonna have chicken. And that's also because in Mumbai they don't let you shecht cows. You could shecht lamb, but you could see it being reasonable that the average person would learn how to be a chicken shoichet, because it would just, even to learn the laws, the halachas, they're just not as complicated. So you could do the whole thing in a couple months. But to be a shoichet for large animals, that is much more involved. It's more complex. And part of what makes it more complex is with chickens, you don't have to check them. They will look at the chicken to make sure it walks okay or something, that it doesn't have broken limbs. But you don't have to do the checking of the lungs and some other things that are checked with larger animals. Plus, it's just much more difficult to you have to the neck can't move at all when you're doing it, and so the technique is takes more training. So those guys are at least a year involvement in order to become a shoichet. And in both cases, you get like a Kabbalah or something called Kabbalah or smicha, some kind of thing where somebody looks over, watches you do it. Part of what they're looking at is to make sure that you don't flinch or what they call fainting. That you can do it, because again, it requires this kind of smooth motion, and especially if you're doing a larger animal, to be able to do that together with everything else that's going on, it's a skill. It takes time to develop the ability to do that. Again, with chickens or other birds, it's much easier you can just bend the neck back with your fingers, and you could just do that quick slice. So, but anyways, they have to receive some kind of Kabbalah, which just shows that a certified shoichet has watched this person do shchita. They've asked them about the laws. They're confident that they know the laws, and then they've watched them shet, so they can tell that they actually know what they're doing. It was one of the ceremonial responsibilities of a rav of a town that once a year, and I think it was before Rosh Hashanah, that once a year the shoichtim would bring their knives, and the rav would check their knives. This is a kind of symbolic way to make sure that they're still on their game, and that that they are still properly doing shchita for the community. And there have been times when rabbanim have run afoul of the shoichtim in the town, and because the rav was trying to bring about more discipline in the shchita part of it. And there are stories about rabbanim in different parts of town. There was a rav that came to Chicago. It was a European rav who was brought into Chicago. I think it was like in the 30s or something like that. I'm just going to look him up for a second because I want to make sure I have this right. He was earlier than that. Let's see here. So he actually was in Chicago. He was elected chief rabbi of the Russian American congregations in Chicago in 1903. He was critical of the absence of moral education received by traditional Jews in America's public schools and the emphasis on sports. He advocated for the creation of full-time Jewish day schools that would integrate religious studies with English language and literature. At the time, there were no full-time Jewish parochial schools in the country. He gained the critical support of Rabbi Bernard Leventhal during the August 1903 meeting in Philadelphia. He tried to introduce order into the religious services of his congregations, but met obstruction and opposition on the part of a former rabbi and his followers. Unable to withstand the persistent opposition, he resigned his position 10 months later and left. Now, there was a story that it was the Shoftim who chased him out of town, but I just want to see if there's anybody who actually says that. Now that I don't want to make up stories here. Read about Oz, Chicago. Shoftim. Chief Rabbi of Chicago and Zakein Rabbanim of America. This is his firsthand account. Ritva Rov of the famed Lithuanian city of Slutsk first visited the United States in 1900 for the purpose of raising funds for the publication of his monumental commentary on the Yerushalmi called the Ritva. It was then that he got his initial taste of the deplorable kashrus situation in New York. He visited Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, famed chief rabbi of New York, and found the great Gaon and Tzaddik to be a broken, forsaken man. Rabbi Yosef suffered terribly as a result of his unsuccessful attempts to regulate the kosher meat industry in New York. The Ritva spent 5 months in America. During that time, he visited almost every major Jewish populated center in the country. In 1903, he returned to America and settled in Chicago. He was appointed Rav of several shuls there and was called the chief rabbi of Chicago. In addition, the Agudas HaRabbanim gave him the honorary title of Zakein HaRabbanim of America, the elder. It was in Chicago that the Ritvaz set out to try and organize the kashrus standards amongst the slaughterhouses and the butchers. At the outset, the Ritvaz refused to accept a salary or even allow the kehillah to pay his rent, saying, until I feel that I'm able to make improvements with regard to Torah and Yira, why do I need a rabbanus or the salary that goes with it? I did not settle in this country in order to earn a living. I was not lacking for any back home. The Ritvaz incisively pointed out the root causes of the complete chaos that characterized kashrus and organized Yiddishkeit in America. He explained that the reason so many people are eating non-kosher meat in America is because America is a country comprised of immigrants from all four corners of the earth. No one knows who the other immigrant is. No one knows his situation. No one knows what is in his home, what is there, and no one knows how he is viewed in the community back home. Many people who in their home times were known as Jews who had cast off mitzvah observance came to America and grew beards in order to fool unwitting people who have no way of checking into their past. These charlatans with long beards and rabbinic garments deliver public drushas and display smicha documents, ostensibly written and signed by great European rabbanim. In a candid admission on how European rabbanim unknowingly and unwittingly contributed to the problems facing American Jewry, the Ritvaz continued, the masses in America do not know that one cannot rely on smicha documents issued in Europe over the past few years. European rabbanim now give smicha to practically every young man who requests it. They are well-intentioned when granting these smichas. They feel that granting the smicha will thereby encourage the petitioner to come closer to the Torah. In truth, however, the last years has been a strengthening in Torah learning in Europe as a result of the more liberal In truth, over the last few years, there has been a strengthening in Torah learning in Europe as a result of the more liberal distribution of smicha documents. It is for this reason that every avrei who knows a bit about the first section of Yoredeya on order of Shulchan Aruch receives smicha. That would be me. I too granted many smicha documents. I did not even dream that these people were far removed from Torah and Yerushalayim. These people were eventually thrown out of their communities in Europe because they were found to be involved in unfavorable conduct, and they fled to America, where they came to shuls and began to deliver drushas. If they were good orators, they were employed by the shul to deliver Shabbos sermons. They then pulled out their smichas, called themselves Rav of the Shul, and there are many such rabbanim throughout the country shuls. Then, with great passion and consummation, the Ritvaz decries the resulting kashrus problems emanating from the relationship of such rabbanim with evil butchers. He writes, similarly, Rishaim Gemuri, absolutely evil people, came from Europe to America and assumed the role of butchers who sell kosher meat to Jews. These rabbanim, in quotes, have teamed up with the wicked butchers, and for a substantial fee, the butcher retains the hashgacha of the Rav, and then earns even more money by feeding tarfus to fellow Jews. In addition, writes the Ritvaz, the Shoktim come from homes completely ignorant of Torah. They know how to wield a knife, and they can show a Kabbalah that authorized them to shech, but in truth, they are kal shebekalim, the lightest of the light. They are people who make extremely light of all that is holy and display a cavalier attitude of Torah observance. This can clearly be seen by all. For example, they will go to the theater on Shabbos Kodesh. The Jews, however, show no interest in clarifying who their butcher is, who their Rav is, who's being mashgiach over him. They rely on the well-known advice, Az mi ruftem Mendel megmen essen fun zen fendel. If they call him Mendel, you can eat his pot. And then he goes on and on and on. And he goes on about the shorting. This is, so after a while, apparently he didn't get the butchers in Chicago to get to a better level. I don't know who actually is responsible for it. But thankfully nowadays we do not have this problem, and we have maybe some other problems people have brought up with meat, which is the conditions of the animals, but we don't, as far as the shoichtim knowing what they're doing, I haven't heard of this kind of issue happening. It'd be interesting to see who finally cleared up this whole thing. But anyways, there is a very important series of tradition that is behind our meat, how this meat is shechted, and who's shechting it, and under what conditions they're shechting it. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Be well.
You know, I was
yeah.
just thinking how ironic, and instead of box cutters, if the terrorists used shockus knives to scare people. I'm sorry.
Well, apparently they didn't need to, unfortunately.
Right.
They were perfectly capable, even with the box cutters.
All right.
Yeah, but there might be some lesson that we're supposed to learn from that.
I don't know.
What it is.
Evil butchers. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye. Bye,
All right.
Rabbi.
Look forward to learning with you
Tomorrow.